Let's talk about sex. Let's talk about sex. Oh, hey. Didn't see you come in there. Hey, everybody. This is Sustainable Culture. My name is Jet McLaughlin. Hey, this is a podcast about exploring the relationship between humans, society, our psyche, and the natural world. Last time we spoke with Aaron from Roast House about tip culture in the coffee industry and the service industry at large. An important conversation that doesn't get enough airtime, and coffee is always especially fun for me since I'm a big coffee dork and have been in the industry for quite some time now. A couple of announcements here. Only 3 days left in the Kickstarter campaign. That's it. I cannot believe we're almost to the end of this thing. If you've been waiting to donate, now is the time to do so. $678 at the time of this recording has been raised, meaning just over $1,100 is still needed to reach the finish line. We have stagnated a bit with the campaign, which is unfortunate to see. However, I want you to know how grateful I am for the support, sharing the campaign, talking about the podcast. It all counts to me, and I appreciate you so much. To donate, find the link in the show notes or search for Sustainable Culture on Kickstarter.com. So what in the world was that intro about? Well, this week's episode is with Sophia and Kaitlan, two genuinely fantastic individuals representing Safe Passage, which is the largest agency serving survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, human trafficking, and child abuse in North Idaho. Safe Passage is one of the largest agencies of its kind in the state. I've wanted to meet with these folks ever since I first started this podcast, so meeting with them finally was a huge honor and a sincere pleasure. They made these heavy topics so light and even fun at times, if you can believe it, and being such an important subject matter, I was grateful to have these two in particular sharing their expertise. A true pleasure. As you may have guessed, today's discussion will largely be based around domestic and sexual violence, as well as things that might cause it. So I want to put a trigger warning out in case these are difficult topics for you to address or hear about. Also, if you or someone you know is or could be a victim of domestic or sexual abuse or any of the other issues that I mentioned before, there is help and validity for you out there. You can call Safe Passage's 24-hour helpline at 208-664-9303, text them at 208-449-7228, or even email them at safety@safepassageid.org. And the website, of course, is always available at safepassageid.org. These people are seriously some of the kindest and most genuine people I have ever met, these ladies, and sometimes just seeking help is a vulnerable act on its own. So off we go then. Let's begin the show once again with episode 28, Violence, Accountability, and the Part We All Play. So I'm sitting here with Sophia and Kaitlan from Safe Passage. Hello, you two.
Hello.
I'm so happy you're here. Thank you for meeting me at 10-6 at the lovely, delightful, whimsical place that we're sitting in.
It is so whimsical, and I'm so happy to be here.
We're so happy
to be here.
This is amazing. It's exciting.
Yeah.
Well, I was thrilled when I got a response right away. I just called you guys up, and it was nice to have a rapport with you as well, having used to deliver cool, donated coffee and stuff to you guys. Mm-hmm. So I want to go ahead and just start, just jump right into it. So Safe Passage, of course, why don't you two, before I get into any of my questions, just give the listeners, I was going to try and explain it, but I think it would be better for you two who are involved in it every single day to give whatever, as brief or as not, a synopsis of what it is Safe Passage is and the services you offer to the public.
Yeah. I'll start, Sophia.
Yeah.
Feel free to jump in, whatever.
Yeah.
So Safe Passage is the local violence prevention center. We provide free and confidential services to those experiencing intimate partner violence, sexual violence, human trafficking, and stalking, regardless of age, regardless of gender. We have tons of amazing services that we offer, such as our 24/7 helpline that people can call at any time for whatever reason, and always be connected with a real person, a trauma-informed person, like at any time. Nobody's ever going to get sent to like a voicemail. And I think our hotline is really important for young people because we are mandatory reporters, so it can be used as a way to stay anonymous, to ask questions and get help and things like that. We offer free counseling, which is what Sophia does. She's one of our awesome counselors there.
Thank you.
We have court advocacy. We have hospital response. We have a children's advocacy center. And we also have education. So we provide healthy relationship consent education throughout Northern Idaho to the middle schools, high schools, juvenile detention center, and to the county jail as well. Whoever really will have us, we want to talk about these things.
That's wonderful. Like the fact that a group like that exists, not just, in Coeur d'Alene is pretty wonderful. Anywhere would be important, but the fact that Coeur d'Alene has somewhere to go, I personally, I mean, as a lot of people here, and in a lot of other cities for sure, but I've heard a lot of crazy stories of just from friends of mine with really serious issues, not just with violence, but also just with potential violence. And that, by the way, is not just physical, but it's also verbal and financial. Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. All of those things play into a horrible situation. And for a long time, I didn't even know you guys existed. And it's just really comforting to know that there's a place to go, which is a lot of what we're talking about today of providing a space for people and what that entails. And so thank you for that description. I appreciate that so much.
One thing I really do want to mention, I forgot to say, is we provide services to Coeur d'Alene, but to the five northern counties.
Yep.
So up to Bonners Ferry, to Plummer, we are there. We work with the local social services, local nonprofits there to make sure that people do not feel alone, that they feel supported. So.
Thank you for bringing that into
it. I also want to add, we do have a shelter. If you are ever feeling unsafe for whatever reason, you can call and we can talk to you and kind of figure out what's going on. See if we can offer a safe place for you to go. We also just got a housing program, so we have 2 amazing housing advocates, and they are probably busier than most of us, and everyone who comes in the Safe Passage obviously has a lot of things going on, so they touch every single department that Kaitlan mentioned earlier, and they also touch our housing department too. So
that's so
reduce the barriers. To prevent violence, right? To create a community free from violence, and also reduce barriers for people who are experiencing violence.
Right. If it's difficult to access, then that kind of defeats the whole message, right?
Yeah, for sure. It does.
Thank you for bringing up the other northern counties. Yes. That's so important because there's a lot more people that live in the northern counties than just in Coeur d'Alene. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, gosh. Okay, so Sophia, let's start with you on this one. So to your comfort, what got you personally into helping victims specifically of domestic violence? Was there something specifically that led you there, or was this something you fell into?
Well, I was getting my master's in social work, and we have to have an internship placement, and I wanted to do something that had to do with women's spaces. I was either going to go try to be at a women's space in Spokane or Idaho, and I just happened to get connected with Safe Passage, loved it, came back for my second internship the second year and did counseling, and then came on full-time in August as a full-time counselor. So really have a big passion just for safety and helping women because, we are already so far behind the metrics. Like 1970s, we are allowed to open up a bank account, right? So it's not that long ago, and we just need to be mindful that, yes, women do face barriers. We do face hardships, and I want to be in that space and help reduce it. Yeah, in a short term. Yeah, there we go.
Kaitlan, how about you?
So at Safe Passage, one of the programs I help oversee is our sexual violence program. So sexual violence prevention is something that's very important to me. It's the piece that I'm extremely passionate about. And I think a lot of us come into this work through experiences. We find our passion, and I found my passion in sexual violence prevention. It's something that I don't think is talked about enough. And so it's kind of my life goal is to have conversations about how we can work towards creating, right, a community that is free from sexual violence and really all forms of violence. I'm extremely passionate about it, and I think it's just my life job. I'm just going to be in this work forever, I think.
She's amazing at it. We call her a little tornado of knowledge in that realm. She just has so much floating around.
Well,
it's amazing.
You know, and I know that this is an audio-only podcast. I wish I had some video to show just how you two are just beaming with passion for this immediately, right out the gate. Like, it is so tangible to me, and it's so inspiring. So, you mentioned something, I didn't even have a note about this, but gosh, you mentioned we were talking about touching on different types of violence, financial, mental, physical, and all that. I wondered if you two could take a few minutes and touch on some of those distinctions. I'm particularly interested in what you said about financial and how that plays into the mental and the physical and everything, because obviously there's manipulation there and everything. Yeah. What could you share about those distinctions? I'm very curious about that.
Unfortunately, when individuals come in, they are often facing multiple layers or levels of abuse or coercion or manipulation, right? Obviously, the most probably obvious one is domestic violence, right? A domestic dispute occurred, a physical abuse happened. We also see another layer behind that is there has been many years or many instances of emotional abuse, right? Degrading comments, making them feel not good about themselves, because, right, when you flip that power scale and you make someone feel awful and horrible and like they don't believe in themselves, it's much easier to control them. Another layer is obviously financial, right? Sometimes moms stay at home for kids, right? Sometimes we've seen it's another form of abuse and their partner just does not want them to work. Either they don't want them to socialize with other people, they don't have eyes on them when they're at work, right? They want to have that total power of control. Yeah. And then, they use children, right, as another layer. So it's just they use their social systems, they use their family. If I can completely isolate you and manipulate you to be completely dependent on me, now I'm winning, right? And so when people walk through Safe Passage, they've taken that first step of like, hey, I need help. Something's going wrong. Maybe I don't know what. And we start to put terms to their life. So then they can go, oh, I am facing financial abuse. Oh, he is controlling me and manipulating me through the kids, right? He is trying to isolate me. He is trying to flip all of my resources and make it seem like I'm the crazy person, right? Right. So it's just, there's so many layers and everyone is so individualized, but there's often multiple things going on.
Wow. Gosh, I feel like we could cover an entire episode with that. That's so deep and fascinating to me because obviously there's this huge element of manipulation when it comes to violence. In many cases, especially domestic violence, I feel like. And I think a lot of people don't think about the financial aspect or how that could be valid or included in that situation. I just find that like fascinating to the degree of tools that some people use to keep control over that situation.
Religion is really common as well. Go ahead,
Kaitlan, you've definitely got some words for this.
Well, I work a lot with young people in the schools, and I'm so lucky to be able to have conversations with them, like what they're experiencing. And we know young people also experience financial abuse within their relationships. Right. So maybe they're not sharing like a bank account, right? Maybe their partner isn't in control of those things, but it's like showing up to their work every day until they're fired. Things like that is another form of financial abuse. It's also making decisions for their partner. Like, no, you can't go to college. You need to stay here with me is another form of financial abuse that young people are experiencing as well in their relationships.
And since we're on the topic of young people, it's really problematic with technology. That's another layer of abuse. I need to go through your phone right now. I need to know who you're texting. Right. I need to have your location on so I know where you're at all times. We've talked to multiple people who are young, under 18, and they say, I have to answer on that first call or text or I'll be in trouble, right? Right. That's not healthy. Those are unhealthy relationship signs.
And I know the statistic on the top of my head because I just it was in my conversation earlier today, but research shows that about 18% of teens who are in relationships are afraid of what their partner might do to them if they don't respond quick enough. Right. So I think it's really important information, not only for people who are experiencing this, but for friends who may be seeing this, like, oh my gosh, every time my friend's partner calls them, they have to leave the room and answer. So it gives us kind of an idea of what to be aware of.
Yeah. And it's happening in older women too, and older individuals, not just women, because men and women can get abused and across the whole binary of spectrums. But technology, and that it's another layer of abuse and manipulation and coercion. So we're seeing it across all ages and all genders, all spectrums. It's just really sad.
Yeah, my gosh. And thank you for speaking to the situation where you're talking about all genders, because one of the points that I was sort of coming up with when I was thinking about like different things we could talk about today was how I've talked to a lot of people about Safe Passage just over the years, I think, just casually. It's been mentioned, it's been whatever the context was. And what's fascinating to me, and I would love some feedback from either of you. We'll start with you, Kaitlan, on this. I think it's fascinating and it speaks volumes, and I'd love to hear that feedback about like how I've had people ask me, Safe Passage, isn't that just a place for women? Mm-hmm. I wonder how often you get that and how often you hear that incorrect distinction.
Yeah.
And just if you have anything to say towards that, because I think that is interesting in a few different ways. Not only are safe spaces important, and thank you, Sophia, for pointing out that it is important for men as well as women, all genders experience violence and oftentimes don't know what to do about it or where to even start. And so I'm fascinated with how many people I've spoken to that assume that Safe Passage, out of many other places too that do similar work, is just for women. And B, why so many men feel like that just doesn't include them.
And I don't think it helps that our name used to be called the Women's Center.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Like
See,
way
I didn't actually know that. Okay, so that's interesting context too.
Yeah, so we started off like in 1977 as the Women's Center, so that probably doesn't help. But yeah, so we do work with men who experience violence. And there are barriers that men face, because I think of like the stereotypes that men can't get abused, right? The shame in that. Of even having to kind of think to yourself like, oh my gosh, I'm experiencing abuse, I think can be really hard for men. And so, yes, Safe Passage, we do have services for men. We do know men experience violence, but we also understand the barriers to coming forward, that shame, right? Mm-hmm. The not thinking that our services are for them too, which is like super unfortunate. Our shelter, for example, like women and children can stay at our shelter, but men, we work with local hotels, and men can stay at those hotels for just the exact same amount of time that women and children can stay at our shelter, because we know men experience violence.
Right.
Another thing I wanted to add is the importance of recognizing, primary and secondary victims, right? So a primary victim, we use survivors, but, someone who's been impacted I've experienced it, me. But a lot of men and boys, teenagers in particular, see secondary violence, domestic disputes between their parents. They know someone who's been going through someone. They know someone who's been sexually assaulted. So it's really important to recognize that, yes, we can help, obviously, people who has been directly impacted, but we can also impact people with secondary trauma, right? That's a great example of how maybe society doesn't recognize what we can provide.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting when we talk about that stigma, because what it's bringing me to is, so some years ago, it's been 5-6 years now, my mom passed away, and going through that whole grieving stage was fascinating in many different respects, because I didn't realize until that time that I'd never grieved anything before properly, and reading books about it and actually going through it is like, I mean, it's wild. It's painful. You think you're dying. Like it's about as bad as you imagine it to be, but it's also kind of a pathway to salvation at the same time. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting what we're talking about now, because I'm thinking of, there's an author named Francis Weller who is a grief expert, and he has a practice, I think in the Bay Area, if I remember this correctly. And on a podcast one time, he was talking about how no man has ever come to my practice voluntarily. Mm-hmm. They come in already broken. Mm-hmm. And I just think that's interesting as a parallel with not just grief, but also mental health and being vulnerable in general, and being able to admit that you can't get yourself out of a situation, which is something that I think it's just bringing me to this interesting stigma, societal stigma around men, just in general when it comes to getting help and seeking out help, that like there is this, you mentioned shame, Kaitlan, about how there is this shame element about needing and not being able to get yourself out of that situation somehow or provide yourself a solution. I just think that's fascinating when it comes to the services you guys give, especially just being able to be welcomed into this space. That is a vulnerable act to put yourself into that space.
And I again, it's the shame because of like the social stigma that like pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right?
Yeah.
Like
it's helped us not a whit. It's not helped anyone. No. I don't think.
Well, and I tell everyone that comes through our doors, like, you've already done the hard step, right? You've already at least acknowledged within yourself that you need help, or you need someone to talk to, or someone to just figure out what is even going on. And then you actually did a second step because then you came here, right? You walked through those doors. We've seen people pull into our parking lot and they never get out because simply just walking through the doors takes so much. And so I like to acknowledge that with anyone who comes in, like, wow, you need to be really proud of yourself. You took the first step, you took the second step, you're here, right? Sometimes even that's just, there's so many barriers of just getting here, right? Mm-hmm. Either mental, societal, obviously like transportation, all those things, all these different barriers we can go on and on about, but they did it and they're here and we're happy to help.
Yeah. And I think it's just really important that we are aware, right, of the barriers for all people who are experiencing violence, and like the barriers for men, right? The fear that no one's going to believe them, right? Because they're a guy and guys can experience abuse and things like that.
Right.
So we understand that.
Yeah, and first off too, thank you for speaking with me about the men element there, because I know it's less common by far.
Yes. Yeah.
But I can't help but speak to that being a man, of course. Like, having many situations in my life where I have known that I needed help getting out of it, like grieving a lost one or a divorce, for example, and things like that. Being able to admit, number one, like I love what you're saying about how like you can drive up to there and just walking through the door, though. Mm-hmm. You could even use that as a metaphor of like walking through the door of experience, of whatever it is that might be. I know from experience too, again, being a man and like seeing that opportunity, I have so many friends who are women who have, not to say that there's this overabundance, but it seems like there's a plethora of options a lot of times for women in society. And I'm wondering about some commentary that either of you would have on this. It seems like there are tons of options and not enough, clearly, but still, when you talk about opportunities for cultural development and getting through some of these things together and as a community, I have always found that there seem to be more options, I will just say it in that way, for lack of a better way to put it, a more eloquent way to put it, when it comes to being a woman and having options, community-based things, groups, seeking help and things like that. For men, it seems like unless it's a religious-based men's group, you just don't find help, unfortunately, unless it's online or something like that. And it's just amazing to me how long that has carried on, not just here, but as a culture, like as a national thing, let alone international, my goodness. Mm-hmm. So when I talk about Francis Weller, he said, people come from literally all over the world to cry in a room together. Yeah. And that says volumes to me. There's just the fact that used to be a natural thing once upon a time that we did as a micro community, and that isn't a thing anymore. So I'm wondering what commentary you might have on, and I don't mean to over focus on just men here, I'm just speaking for the men in the audience, I suppose. But when it comes to having options, this just being an open topic here, like what kind of direction would you like to see that go? And what kind of tools do you think would help people of any gender knowing that they're, to know that there is a place to go and that it's not shameful to go to that place. Mm-hmm. In fact, it's a brave move, if anything. Yeah. It's standing up for yourself. It's like the first step, it seems like, is just getting there.
Do you want to go? You want me to go?
I mean, we can just kind of like go off of each other. Yeah. I don't know. I think it just really starts with like conversation and like awareness that yeah, like obviously we want to provide equitable services, right?
Yeah. Yep.
But a guy may come in and realize that the counselors that we have are female and may not feel comfortable, right? Like sharing their sexual assault experience or their intimate partner violence experience to a woman, like, and that's totally normal. Or like our support groups, right? We don't have like a support group for men. And so like, I understand that, like that our services aren't equitable, right? That's something that we strive for. And I think it just,
I think this can be traced back to like the whole mental health movement, right? We've seen a huge movement in recent years of normalizing getting help, normalizing it's okay to be not okay, right? Because for so long, society, it was what happened behind closed doors. We don't care, right? We don't care what's going on behind your home. We don't want to know. Don't tell us, don't bring it up. So then of course that creates barriers to having services in the community, right? When we don't know what's going on behind closed doors, how can we help? So then with the mental health movement of bringing things to light, right? Like go face the sun, right? Go stand in the sun, let the light be shown on these issues. That of course is helping. And to speak to the men, there are resources for you. And even if you don't think they are for you, if you come in and it's something we can't particularly help with, we're always going to give you a resource of another place to go. We're always going to try to help you. And it's obviously very state by state, right? The amount of resources, how funding is, but at least for Idaho, Safe Passage does try to be inclusive towards all genders and recognize that, yes, men, teen males, boy males, they experience these things too. And we need to be aware of that because of what the trends are showing, because of what research shows us. And of course, we can always be better, right? I love having a growth mindset. We can always be better. We should always strive to be better. We should never have a closed off, these are only things we can do. These are services. So I think like Kaitlan said, I would love to have more spaces for men and more spaces for LGBTQ non-binary places where they can feel safe. So I think that's just a thing we need to strive towards.
And I think it starts like with awareness and conversation too, that men experience violence, for men to hear that, hopefully, right? Like that they do experience violence and there's no shame in that. Like if they were to come into Safe Passage, we're going to believe them. So I think the more we talk about it, we can really reduce that stigma around it. And hopefully, from that, have more men, right, come in and share their experiences with us.
Yeah, well, and so I have taken up a lot of airtime, I think, talking about the guys in the audience, which I I appreciate you two speaking to that so much. And we'll talk some more about that in a minute after the break, I think. But when it comes to your largest, I was going to say audience, but your largest base of people who come in, I imagine it's largely women. And so I'm wondering, first off, if I'm assuming that correctly, and second off, what are some of the most, I guess, pressing matters that you're seeing as societal issues regarding that, as opposed to, so like when people come in, let's say when a lot of women come in, there's obviously going to be stuff you've seen before and stuff that is reminiscent of other cases and things like that. What are some of the stuff? We'll start with you on this, Kaitlan, and then we'll trail off, because Sophia, you as a counselor, I'm sure you're seeing lots of interesting cases there. But what are some things that you see come up a lot, and some things that you're seeing some of the biggest opportunity as a cultural set of issues?
I think in my experience, right, because a lot of my experience with this work, with the direct client work, is sexual violence, right? And yes, like a majority, right, of the people most impacted by types of violence, intimate partner violence, sexual violence, are women. And we also know who are even at a higher risk are people who are part of like the LGBTQ community as well. And so when we're talking like culturally, right, I think about this, I don't know, I hate using this word, right? The rape pyramid. So it basically like starts off, right? If you can think of like the food pyramid, right? Growing up, like, okay, you need to eat this many grains, things like that. But basically at the very bottom. Oh,
thank you, Sophia. So I have here a visual here.
Yeah, and I can kind of describe it because I have it on my phone as well, but basically at the bottom, right, you have behaviors like sexist attitudes, rape jokes, locker room banter, and as you go up higher, right, you have unsolicited and nude photos, groping, non-consensual photos.
Catcalling, I just want to call out.
And then at the very top, right, you have victim blaming, shaming, right, sexual coercion, things like that, to molestation, right, rape, homicide, things like that. And what this shows us is that when we tolerate, which we do as a society, we tolerate the behaviors at the bottom, right? Yeah. We hear it.
Or we write it off as not a big deal.
Right? Yeah. It's not that big of a deal. But when we tolerate these behaviors at the very bottom, right, they become social norms. Like those at the very bottom are social norms. And when we tolerate those behaviors, it supports or excuses those at like the top. Yep. And so, and I don't know if this is where your question was going, or if I'm just kind of going.
It is, absolutely.
I think culturally around sexual violence specifically, because that's just my experience working with people and in my work in general, is we need to call out. We need to be active bystanders in those situations when we hear sexist remarks, when we hear, well, did you see what she was wearing, right? Why did she drink so much? Yeah. Or she just regretted this. She's just saying that sexual assault because she's...
She was flirting with him all night.
Right. Looking for an opportunity to blame the victim at this point. She was looking for
drinks. Yeah, you're just looking for things at that point.
And there's so many things that we can do as a community in regards to sexual violence prevention and intervention, because they're both important. And I think the first thing we need to do is believe people when they come forward, because... For some reason, when survivors of sexual violence, regardless of gender, we are more likely to see them as lying. And John Krakauer, I don't know if you're familiar with his work, he wrote a really great...
In name only, unfortunately.
Missoula about the
rape on the campus.
Because, college-age students are at the highest risk for sexual violence.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so he had a really great quote that I saved. And he said that sexual assault is probably the only crime in which the victim is assumed to be lying. And so believing survivors, right, is one of the top things that we can do. And having conversations about these attitudes that are not okay, but that have been so normalized, right? Yeah. So it starts with education. It starts with awareness and really going from there.
I also want to piggyback off of you really quick. Sexual violence, and in particular, and child sexual abuse, we do not see the justice that it deserves, right? If you can imagine an inverted triangle, right? These are all the people that have been impacted by this form of violence. And then we already know that a very few % come out and share their story. So then now it's narrower down the triangle. And then within that, when they do disclose to whoever, law enforcement, they make a report, it's even fewer who actually go to trial and get that justice. So it's really important for us at Safe Passage. This has been something I've been talking about a lot, is we need to be their form of justice. And that means believing them, telling them, I believe you. You don't need to over-explain things because I believe you. You don't have to convince me it happened.
Isn't that wild how just the validity is a form of justice on its own? I've personally felt that a lot in several instances. Like, that to me blows my mind how, because it speaks to a larger issue of how long we've invalidated one another's experiences.
And so culturally, right, when we have this cultural mindset of, yes, we don't believe people or we need to question them because, her story doesn't make sense. Well, the trauma brain works in really funny ways. So you can retell your story and you can not remember things and forget. And so it can come across to someone who's not, trained in trauma that they could be lying. But that's just how the trauma brain works, right? It's all over the place. They're scattered. And so just calling awareness to that to shift society to be like, hey, when someone comes forward, this is the hardest moment of their life. What do they get out of lying for it? And research shows that there's, very actual little cases that people are lying about being sexually assaulted or incurring some form of violence. And that's important to call out because we don't get anything from sharing our most vulnerable truth with, detectives or with counselors.
Right.
We're just trying to heal or get justice.
And I think just because we're on this platform and it's really important to me, I think that people are aware of this.
Please do,
is that oftentimes people think as sexual violence is like this stranger danger in the alleyway, and it is not this. So 80% of the times it's for adults, the number jumps up to over 90%. It's some form of acquaintance. So a partner, a friend, a roommate, somebody that we should have been able to trust. And so it can be really hard for the society, right, to be able to see this person as a rapist, right? No, this person's amazing. Oh my God, they would never do that. Like, I've known this person for 20 years.
You hear in man's culture, you hear, well, he's a good guy.
Yeah, all the time.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry to break it to you, right? Like, it's the people that are seen as really awesome people in the community. Really
well, let me help you with that call out. I'll just I'll have the
Call
layup
in.
here. I'll call it up here.
Yeah,
So
you'll tap in.
because I have a lot of wonderful women in my life who have felt vulnerable enough to share these awful experiences to me. I can't count the amount of times a friend of mine who's a woman has told me these, sometimes a milieu of awful stories that really happened that they're just telling me about. And I'm like, has everyone dealt with this? And everyone will be like, yeah. And so I will just say, as a man, it's mind-blowing to me how often I hear these stories from women and how I never, ever hear any of the men that I've ever met go, I made a mistake once.
Yeah.
And I treated someone like horrible garbage, and I did this. I've never heard anyone who's a man admit something like that. But I do hear quite a bit of women talk about their stories. So it's just they're just going through life being a good guy, but how can you possibly blame this lack of trust from women as a whole, as a just a larger gender? Like, I can't blame anyone for having this distrust or this discontent or this cynicism towards the idea of being in a relationship with a man, not let alone being comfortable around men, just socially.
Well, and another thing I want to really, this is one of the points I wanted to bring up today, is here in Idaho, so this is not even, nationwide, 1 out of every 4 homicides is due to an intimate partner violence. And so, like you said, how can women feel like safe and be vulnerable? Well, like Kaitlan said, it's happening by people we know, and it's happening by quote unquote good guys. Any person can be a perpetrator or an abuser, and it's really important to be aware of that statistic because that's really scary, right?
Yeah.
1 out of 4 murders is done by an intimate partner. That's terrifying to me.
Which I think speaks to this larger issue of like how you guys were talking about just this form of justice just starting at validity. I think that, and this is not making, despite what I just said, this isn't making men out to be these victims. It does speak to a complex sort of myriad of issues where it's like not only is coming forward as someone who has been abused a really difficult act, but when you're talking about someone who's done the abusing, whether it's man or woman or whatever, then coming forward as someone who has failed and has done something horrible is so important and so shamed on its own, because of course it is. I mean, it's just difficult because when you have a victim, you have a perpetrator. And so I guess what I'm speaking to is this lack of opportunity for redemption that I see in our society as well, which is fascinating to me and a troublesome thing.
And I think specifically with sexual violence is they don't see themselves as rapists.
Right.
Because it's not, because the stereotype is the stranger danger.
Yeah.
Right.
Or so when they're the partner,
in the alleyway
the
thing,
husband, or the like whomever, right? Like they're like and I've read this, like in Missoula by John Krakauer, is they don't see themselves as rapists.
Yeah.
They don't consider what they're doing as rape because it's not the stranger danger thing. And a majority of sexual violence is not done by physical force. It's through sexual coercion, manipulation, threats, and things like that. So
you mentioned the financial aspect. That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's horrible.
And so when they're like, well, I wasn't physically holding this person down, right?
Yeah.
Like,
slippery slope, buddy. Like, what are we talking about here?
Another really important thing that I tell all of my clients who this is pertinent to. So in Idaho, we have this thing called an IRAD, and it's a screening tool that police officers and our agency uses to measure like lethality of an altercation. So, one of the things on there is, were they raping you? Like, it doesn't matter, like marital rape is on there. Another thing on there is strangulation, right? We often, in society, again, talk about society, I like to be like choked in bed. No, that's not choking. You're being strangled, right? When you're strangled by your partner, you're 7 times more likely to be murdered by them. So when someone tells me like, oh, he strangled me. Oh, I have kids in the home that aren't biologically his. They have access to weapons. They are using drugs or alcohol. There is already stressors going on. That's a very complex, very scary household that I'm already seeing. Wow, you just said 5 things that make you much more likely to be a part of that statistic of 1 in 4.
Would you say that's common in your work?
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Probably almost every single person who comes in a safe passage has experienced one form of what we screen for, or what the police screen for. And that's why it's so scary, and society needs to be aware of, like, hey, if these things are happening, if he is sexually abusing you, and again, you can be married and you can be sexually abused. You can be in a long-term committed relationship and you can be sexually abused. No means no. And that's all it means. That's point blank, period. So again, these things go hand in hand. Domestic violence and sexual assault.
It's all about power and control.
Yeah.
Like, sexual violence is never about sexual gratification. It is about power and control.
Mm-hmm.
And the
So
same goes for
domestic
intimate partner
violence.
violence. It's always about power and control. One person having control over another person.
Yeah.
And that's
Scary. And we tell the people who come in, when you're leaving, you're at your most vulnerable, because you're starting to take away that power and control. And so what does that person do? They're going to do whatever they can, grab, claw, whatever they can at you to maintain that power. So that's when you start to see those other forms of abuse, right? The social abuse, financial abuse, technology abuse, the stalking often comes hand in hand with intimate partner violence too, right? They are stalking them in some form, whether that be through technology or, physical stalking. So all these things are very real and very scary, and they all play with each other, which is why talking about it and being here with you talking about this is so important.
Yeah, these conversations matter a lot. And
Yeah.
it just, again, like Kaitlan, how you were talking about just the building awareness, just the talking about it, of just hearing other people go, yeah, that's real, is a start, and a very important one for sure. I mean, that's what got me started on grieving and things like that. Like, hearing other men talk about it openly was enough for me to go, okay, I'm not a failure. I'm not, invalidated somehow because I feel sad. Same, I would say, from what you're describing with, getting some help with the domestic or sexual abuse and things like that. Like, just kind of admitting to yourself that is a valid thing. And it's more common than you think. Even if you're not sure about it, it's a really good idea to get some help, and at the bare minimum, have some support and community and some people to validate you, because I think as individuals, you were mentioning how there's a mental health crisis here and how we've been growing with that, but there's so much opportunity still. We are our own worst critics, especially when it comes to situations that are happening in our own lives. Man, this is wonderful so far. We could talk for like 3 hours. We're going to take a quick break here, have a little bathroom break, take a little stretch, a little breather break. And I have some stuff that I hope we're going to have some fun with after the break here in the midst of all these really important, but of course, heavy topics. So, well, thank you both so much. We'll be right back. And we're back. Well, thanks so much for sticking around, everybody. I'm so glad to be having this conversation. My goodness, the trains we have had to prevent ourselves from going down. So we have touched on a lot of very deep, wonderful, touchy issues that we are going to kind of keep continuing that trend of. Gosh, we could talk again. I could even say that we could maybe at some point in the future could talk again more about something maybe more specific.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, off air we were talking about a host of things, everything. And it's just, I love how passionate the two of you are. I know I mentioned that at the top of this. it is a joy to talk to people who are passionate about what they do. And it makes for great audio, which is a plus.
Woo! Thank you.
So, continuing on the trend of some of these touchy topics, let's get right into it right after the break. Let's talk about porn.
Woo!
Woo! All right. Now, why are we talking about porn? So, part of what you had mentioned, Sophia, before the break, we were talking about, now, first off, when we talk about sexual violence and we talk about domestic disputes and things like that, you were talking about issues with that couples kind of come into contact with some of the sticky topics when it comes to sexual activity. You mentioned choking and things like that. And some people might get kind of weird and queasy and uncomfortable listening to stuff like this, but it is so important and so present in our society. Yeah. Everybody watches porn, I feel like. I mean, there's a lot of really hilarious stats on this about how many people interact with porn and the activity that kind of sort of installs in our brain, if you will.
Yes.
So speaking to this topic, why don't we start, Sophia, let's start with you on this. We could go a lot of different directions with this, but to help keep it at least a little bit focused so we can get onto a couple other talking points before we end, I would like to speak specifically about how porn culture has affected your work.
Yeah.
And what you see, let's start with women, and how that has also kind of shifted the mindsets and behavior patterns of men. So let's start with that the best you can.
Well, porn, obviously the more you watch it, the more desensitized you get, right? So that creates that slippery slope of, I don't want to watch the quote-unquote vanilla porn anymore. I need to watch darker things to get off, because you do just get desensitized. That's just the scientific fact. So when we have a society that is watching, violent porn, porn that is unconsensual, that is really just graphic, women experience that because that's what their partners are doing to them. I watched it in porn, so now I get to do it to my partner, and that's not okay for a whole lot of reasons again. And it's really impacting obviously women's self-confidence. It's scary for women. Again, choking, that's a great, throw around term, but it's really just strangulation. And that is scary because, like I said earlier, you have a higher chance of being killed. It's impacting our youth. And I know Kaitlan will talk about this too, but when youth are watching more and more violent porn, that's what they're doing to their partners, men or women. And it's not to be a shameful topic, it's to be educational, right? We need to just educate to be safe with what we're watching. Go ahead, Kaitlan.
Yeah, Kaitlan, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I think kind of shifting towards young people and having conversations with folks who work at our Children's Advocacy Center, and what they're seeing is that the porn that young people are watching is getting more and more violent. Yep. They're Googling online, right? There's a lack of sex education within the schools, or abstinence only, and so youth are going to get that information elsewhere. The easiest place to get that is online, Googling, and porn. And the porn that they are consuming is extremely violent, non-consensual, right? A lot of strangulation, violent acts, and also very incestuous.
Yes.
Yeah, we were talking off air about how there's a lot of really, really fascinating trends about what kind of porn people are watching in certain countries. Yes. And what is fascinating, I'll just state again now that we're on the air, is just to touch on what you're referring to, is that in the U.S., and this is a real stat, guys, in the U.S., the most common genre of porn that people watch is sibling-oriented stuff, which is so weird. But that is by far the most common trend that we see in this country, at least, which is wild. So when you talk about education, and especially with young people and access. Yeah.
And so it's not being talked about, right? No. So they're just getting this information online, and it becomes normalized. There's not an issue with it because they're not being told by anybody else that there's an issue with it until maybe they come to the, my consent class. And it's actually consent does matter, but it becomes an issue because it becomes so normalized. And they think that because they see this in the video that they're watching, that it's okay to do this to their partner, that their partner wants this.
Yep.
Yeah.
When in fact there is no communication between
Partners.
partner 1, partner 2,
Yeah.
right? And so now this sexual assault has just occurred because person A thought it was okay. They watched porn. They're like, okay, this is happening. My partner wants this, does this to partner, and partner did not, in fact,
and
want
just like,
that.
yes, with sexual assault, it also goes with domestic violence too, like slapping someone across the face.
Right.
Yeah.
That is something that I feel like, again, you need to have a conversation with prior to make sure that you're on this, same page. But just to throw some statistics out there, I love Fight the New Drug. It's a non-shaming, research-based institution that's focused on, changing the culture of porn and bringing research and awareness to how violent it is and how that impacts youth and the community at large. And they found that 1 out of every 8 porn titles shows first-time users on porn homepages describing acts of sexual violence. So first-time porn users, right? Those probably
1 out of every 8?
Yeah, 1 out of every 8.
Whoa.
For first-time users, it jumps to 1 out of every 3 when you're reoccurring.
Whoa.
Yeah. So again, think about it. For teens who are just starting to get into watching porn or wanting to learn, and they're going through porn, 1 out of 8 videos that they're scrolling through is sexually violent in nature. 1 out of every 3 when you come back and now you're watching it more often.
Yeah.
1 out of every 3 is violent. So that's obviously impacting.
It's learned behavior.
Yes, it's
they're
very
learning that
scary.
this behavior is okay.
Right.
Yeah.
You kind of get this programmed thought that well, this must be how society is.
Yeah.
And look, I've been a teenage boy before, and there's a lot of focus when you're coming into your sexual self, where you're a little too focused, and you don't have conversations with your parents about this and stuff like that, and the behavior is not good when it comes to that, and very obsessive. And there's shows like Big Mouth that have made a wonderful statement, I think, as graphic as it is, about the reality of what a lot of teenage kids are going through, not just boys, but, and so when it comes to an overabundance of exposure to these types of things, you start to just think that that's how society is, and that's how people are. And that's what you were saying, Kaitlan, of well, this must be what she wants, and that kind of thing, when there's no conversations around it at all.
Yeah, there's this story out of John Krakauer's book, Missoula, how this student had never had sex before, had learned about sex through porn, and thought that this is what this person that he met that night wanted. And it...
I need to read this book.
I have
It's great.
I have
It's
5
great.
copies that I just purchased from thrift stores in my car. I'll get you one.
No way.
Yeah.
Okay, I will absolutely
It's such a
read
good book.
Yeah.
Shout out John Krakauer.
John Krakauer, if you're listening to this, you are loved.
I really like how he draws attention to the barriers of reporting sexual violence on campus and all the things. But anyways, back to porn.
So back to porn.
And I think it's a problem.
Yeah.
But are we talking about it? No. And I think it's something that nobody with a 20-foot pole is going to want to talk about or bring into their school to have people come and talk about. So it's where do we start with these conversations? And that's
talk about, we were talking again off air about the nuance and how that's so difficult to touch into nuance about a lot of topics, not just porn, but it's when you're talking about the shame involved and don't talk about it.
Yeah.
It's shameful to talk about it. There's a lot of bigger reasons why that I will save for another episode, but it is interesting to me how there is such taboo around talking openly about sexual activity
and safe
sex and not safe sex and how we just don't talk about it unless you go to a place like Safe Passage when everything has already gone wrong. Why are we waiting until that point? And there's a lot of reasons why, but that's why we're talking about it. It's fascinating to me as well that nobody talks about this stuff.
Yeah, no, and they don't. And just with the rise of technology, it's just going to, I predict, get more of a prevalent issue. And again, longitudinal
AI.
Qualitative research has found that these porn descriptions on websites encourage coercion, pain, and other risky behaviors that contributes to how teens view what porn or what sex should look like, right?
Right.
So it's just creating a really bad narrative. It's really unhealthy.
Where this person now has just been sexually abused, and the person causing the abuse is I had no idea. This is what I watched online, and this is what I thought I was supposed to do.
Yeah.
And so we need to be having these conversations with young people right now.
A lot. Often.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yearly.
Yeah. So consent education, people.
Consent is cool.
Consent is cool. I like that. Well, and that's truly, I would love to have a separate conversation another time about consent, because as we were sort of talking about earlier off air there, again, we did talk about everything off air. Like, there was a whole separate, I don't have any B-rolls, unfortunately. I don't have any, this is why I need to start a Patreon, man, because we could just have, extended footage. But we talked about a lot of the subtleties around consent and how consent is incredibly important, but it is also not the entire picture.
Yeah.
And there's so much involved
there's so much more to it.
So much more to it. So we will have to meet another time and talk much more in length about consent. I would adore
Happy
that.
To do
Happy to be here.
So so thank you so much for that conversation about porn. I think that we need to talk about that a lot more, and truly that's another full-on episode for sure.
Yeah.
But,
Yes.
so let's speak a little bit to, and this could kind of perfectly sort of dovetail into this. Let's speak to cycles. Sophia, you had mentioned this, and I'm so glad you did, about generational abuse and cycles of abuse over generations and things like that. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so a lot of the times the people who we're seeing and helping, they don't recognize what they've gone through as abuse because they've watched their parents do it. They've watched their grandparents do it. They've watched the neighbors do it, right? As a society, we've created a normalized abuse, right? We've in TV shows, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've had many conversations with Kaitlan about how it perceives what unhealthy and healthy relationships look like. It glorifies unhealthy, right?
Now I'm gonna put you on the spot. Can you give me some example, off top of your head, examples of that?
Euphoria.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I don't have
one.
many things that are kind to say about.
Well, think about
that.
the normal romantic trope, right? Guy wants girl maybe isn't that interested. Guy then does all these huge acts, showing up at her house with a boombox over his head, right? That's stalking behaviors. If I don't want you at my home, please don't show up to my home, right? How did you know where I live? So again, it's very subtle. No one really.
I'm sorry. I don't mean to make light of that. I just love that. I love that you're making that point.
Yeah.
Also because I love that movie. So it's
So again, when people don't realize that the undertone of this is stalking, the undertone of this is unwanted contact. We are now, there's how many generations have been so normalized with these behaviors that when my boyfriend shows up to my house with roses because we've gotten in a fight, I don't want you there. I would have invited you to my home, right? So it's just generations have been normalized back to generational trauma, right? So of course people don't recognize it. It's been happening. How could they? Society normalizes it. It's normalized within their own home. So we really have to just change the whole perception of what these behaviors are and call them out as it is.
I would also, and Kaitlan, I want to let you continue on this in just a second, but I would also I think it's a sort of a multi-leveled issue there, because you're starting to touch on some really interesting complexities, because with that behavior comes this sort of co-expectation, an expectation on both people in that relationship, right? So by popularizing that sort of behavior, and correct me where you think is appropriate here, but I think that it's interesting how you get to this first off, it's a little inappropriate, these things, how did you even know where I live and stuff like that. That's a bit disturbing. But also, by glorifying it and romanticizing it, then you have, and again, me speaking for the men in the audience here, then you have this interesting expectation where it's how come you don't care about me enough to do that?
Right.
And then you have this sort of
warped perception
of what romantic relationships are supposed to be and consist of.
And again, because of how TV is, it's looking for click views, right? So they're going to show the big dramatic argument and then them coming together and saying I love you. That's not healthy. What healthy relationships is open communication, honesty, right? Accountability, transparency. The big arguments and then being I love you is not the way to communicate. And it's what, again, so many generations have been told to do, so of course it's not working. And our youth today is confused as ever because they have access to everything at the touch of their fingertips. TikTok, social media, everything glorifies all these unhealthy behaviors, and so it's really important to just call it out.
Yeah. Well, I think social media too, TikTok. I mean, I've seen some very ick what do you call them? Influencers?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
dating
an appropriate
professionals
word.
who they disregard. When a woman says no, you just keep trying, right?
Yeah.
You just keep pushing.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
But going back to that cycle of violence, which again is why prevention education is so important,
Yes.
is when, like, last school year, like when I was in the schools, so we talk about, like, there's no shame when we're having these conversations. If we haven't experienced healthy relationships in the home, how are we supposed to know what a healthy relationship should feel like, look like, not taste like, sound like, feel like, look like, sounds like. And in the like, I've gotten this real feedback. Like, sometimes I get, like, I'll have a student come up to me and be like, oh my gosh, I didn't know what I was experiencing was abuse because it wasn't physical, it was emotional. The biggest wins for me, and I've had this happen countless times, is when I have a student come up to me and they come up to me and they share, I'm the toxic one in the situation. Like, I'm the abuser in the relationship. And really being vulnerable. And I feel like this has happened. I was so caught off guard the first time this happened to me.
Yeah.
And it is so cool when they can feel like that vulnerable and take that accountability and that first step in, like, that behavior change, because they didn't know at home that's how they talked to each other. That's how they communicated in arguments, was yelling, was throwing things, was punching holes in the wall. And so to be able to learn that these traits are not forms of, like, a healthy relationship is, like, huge. And so when a student comes up and, like, shares that, it's like, okay, like, let's work towards that behavior change. Like, thank you for, like, sharing that with me. And that's, like, when we really start making, like, big changes, like that, breaking that cycle of abuse.
Yeah.
When, like, these young people are coming up and being so vulnerable and, like, I did this. What do I do?
That's incredible, because I've never, like, I can't think of any time in my own life that a grown man has come to me, another man, where we have a sort of space to be vulnerable, hopefully, but it is also not really a thing in culture, which we kind of talked about again. Again, everything was off air. So, but I've never seen a grown man come to me and admit those types of things ever.
Well, and it's really hard too. It's amazing we're teaching our youth, but older generations need to tap in too, because from what I've seen is we are, teaching our youth, and then they're becoming more emotionally intelligent than their parents.
Yeah.
And so then how do we create that healthy behavior at home? The team can only, change so much behavior in the home, right? You can only be responsible for you. So it's like, we need not just youth to tap in. We need every single generation to realize and be accountable of their behaviors.
Community effort.
It takes a complete community effort. Yeah.
Well, it does, and I think that speaks to what we have lost in our society. Whenever I listen to Indigenous leaders talk about how culture used to be in not just their circles, but just as how life was. There's a wonderful book called Braiding Sweetgrass. Have you heard of this book?
Yeah.
One of my favorite books I've ever read on anything about science or sustainability or anything, and it's one of the biggest books. Robin Wall Kimmerer, the author, is an incredible sage of a human being, and her background with native knowledge and then intersecting with a lot of environmental type sciences. She's one of the few people I've heard synthesize the importance of community and how it relates to sustainable, I'll say it, sustainable culture, like a culture which can sustain itself and actually value its community. So one of the things she talks about in length is the idea that we used to use community or rely on community, I guess, to get us through a lot of these complex issues, these vulnerable issues, these mistakes that we've made, how we've wronged someone. Used to be that we helped each other as a group, as a family, as a community get through these things. And we are finding less and less and less outlets for that in our own society, unless you go to like a place like Safe Passage, or if you're just very lucky to have a support group or access to one. And if you're able to get past the stigma of approaching one,
Yep.
And one thing, it's why, another reason why I love just working at Safe Passage is because, it's creating a community free from violence, right? And we know it takes a community.
Yeah.
And so this is why we're always inviting people from all organizations, from business owners, right, to coaches, to everybody, because it totally takes a community to step up and say, I'm not tolerating this anymore. What can I do?
Yeah.
And so a big goal of our outreach program, or education outreach program, is to get into every single space we can to provide that awareness, that education. We are happy to go wherever to be able to bring that awareness to people. It takes everybody. And our role is going to look different, right? What we're comfortable with, what we're not comfortable with, but it like takes all of us. And I truly believe in that. And I love that that's like our mission at Safe Passage, because it does take a community.
Yeah.
And they're not full of crap because they're on a podcast, guys. These are two ladies who, as I mentioned, like at the like way earlier on, like you guys are beacons of passion about this subject. It's very genuine, and I see that. However, I can help in that outreach, you let me know. This is at use to your disposal. Like, this episode is not the end of the support for this stuff. This is so important to me as someone who, I don't have any kids of my own. I'm an uncle of these two incredible angels of little girls. And, shout out to my sister Connie, because, she's incredible at being mom to these two little ladies. But, however this can continue, I would love to do anything I can. Join you in a speech or whatever it would be, whatever.
Oh, I already have ideas, so.
Oh, wonderful. That's great.
And even you just saying that, right? It does take a community, and that's a first step. Yeah. That's another avenue of education and spreading awareness, and just honestly listening. You just listening to us and communicating with us, that is like everything.
Giving us this space to have these like hard conversations, that's huge. Like, this is so important.
Oh man, here's a soapbox. Take it. Yeah.
We have indeed.
Well, so gosh, this is such a wonderful talk. So we're getting closer to the end here, but I want to touch on a couple of other key things. Yeah. First, what is the responsibility? We've touched on men and some of the complexities therein to a lot of these issues. What would you say? I'll start with you, Sophia, on this. I would love to hear from both of you on this. But what is the responsibility of men in these sorts of situations, not just in terms of sexual abuse, but also as victims of it too? Like, what are some of the responsibilities you see with men in terms of a cultural change moving forward?
Yeah, I think being vulnerable, right? Listening to others, feeling safe to share. Those are all really great starts. Kaitlan's going to touch upon this more too, but I think we need to start shifting the light. The easiest way to explain this is there was a string of attacks on New York women, and all the headlines were like, women was attacked, and why is it not like man attacked women? So it's just understanding and creating spaces where women are not just having the spotlight on them. And same with like all survivors, all individuals who are being impacted by violence. They are often targeted, and we need to start shifting responsibility, not blame, but shifting responsibility in,
accountability.
Social settings, community settings, taking accountability, which I know Kaitlan is probably eager to talk about as well.
No pressure.
And before like kind of diving into that too, I think it starts with, I think story sharing is huge. Like, that's how like movements happen, is like one person shares a story, another person hears that, and then they feel like they can finally come forward and share their experience. So I think story sharing is like one of the biggest tools we can use that we don't use enough to create movements of change.
I will back you up on that, because I'm a student of science, and I appreciate science in a lot of different ways, but it has also failed us in a lot of very fascinating ways to me, such as invalidating anecdotal experience.
Yeah, it's that qualitative piece, right? That's
exactly
important.
Qualitative.
It's that qualitative piece that's really important.
Well, and you take the human nature out of experiments, right? We want them to be data-driven, and we want every single one of these participants to have the same qualifiers or have the same backgrounds, and that's really hard to do just as a human species, right? We are all so different and multifaceted and complex that storytelling is truly the only way where we're going to understand how we can connect. Because even just off air, we've connected in numerous ways that I wouldn't have ever thought we would have connected on. Through story sharing. So,
in matter of fact, the very first episode of this podcast, seems like ages ago, was about stories. And that kind of got me into this whole topic, actually. It's fascinating that you're pointing that out, because, at least to me personally, because it hits home for me, because that is where things start. Believing one another in that, just the validation, going back to that, of like, wow, that's crazy, and I'm here for you, and I'm listening to you, and I'm not in disbelief, and I'm not immediately going, well, where were you? What were you wearing? That kind of thing.
My favorite quote for us that like our agency says is, we are advocates, we're not investigators, right?
Well said. I like that.
That's our job.
That's our job. Like, we believe you regardless. You don't need to, tell us your whole life story. We believe you, and that's all it needs to be. And that's all it should be.
Yeah. God. So my last point, and I'm going to, I want to talk about so many more things, but my last point that I want to end on here is there's a bullet on the Safe Passage website.
Yeah.
That stuck out to me in particular. There's a lot of wonderful things on that website, first off, but one of the things that it said, and I quote, was prevention requires work towards social change.
Yeah.
I think that's more profound than it seems as just a single bullet point.
Yeah.
When we talk about social change and how prevention towards a lot of these issues that we're talking about, they involve this larger change, right?
Yeah.
We can only get there through stories and conversation and things like that. So like just this idea that in order to actually make prevention happen,
we have to have a societal shift.
We do.
Yeah. So I think with every facet in human nature, the first step is obviously education and awareness. And then obviously it seems silly, but you almost have to like backtrack to prevention. Because, when you start identifying issues or barriers in the community, obviously you haven't been doing prevention, right? And so then you have to do intervention. And, for our work, it's like counseling or going to court services or housing service or all the different things. So you do all these immediate interventions. And then you almost have to backtrack to like, okay, now in my next relationship, I need to be doing prevention. So as society, I wish that there was a way to like start with prevention first. But it seems like that doesn't happen. Does that make sense?
Do you think it's appropriate to say that sometimes intervention comes before the prevention aspect itself? Because sometimes the art of preventing something from happening is intervening and calling someone out on their entire life's outlook.
And actually, intervention is a part of prevention.
Yeah.
So there's like in prevention, there's primary, secondary, and tertiary. Primary is like preventing it before it even happens, right? So that nobody ever has to experience it. Secondary is that intermediate intervention. This through through like hospital response advocacy, things like that. Like this just happened to this person, we are there to support them. And then we have tertiary prevention, which is kind of like the long-term counseling, things like that. So they actually are all types of prevention, which is really, really interesting.
That is interesting.
It is interesting.
And I always like this metaphor, right? Where people are at a river, right? And they're trying to get across the river and they keep on, have you heard of this before?
Yeah. I don't think so.
Where they keep on like falling in and they can't get out. And so they put people at the very end, like lifeguards, to like help them get out of the water. And it's like, okay, this is working, right? We are intervening, we are saving lives, but we also are missing that like prevention piece, like going upstream, right? The upstream prevention and building a bridge so that we don't have to have the people at the bottom intervening. Yeah. And so
I haven't heard that metaphor, and if I have, I don't remember it, but I like that in context of this particular issue, certainly.
Yeah.
Because you're talking about like, you can keep pulling them out of the water, you can keep recovering from mistakes you've made, but if you don't get ahead of that and understand how to prevent from putting yourselves in those situations in the first place, both as the perpetrator or the victim, I think both of those things are helpful.
Yeah.
To an extent, of course, if you're truly a victim in that situation. But both of those steps are equally as, I think they're tied together, is what we're touching on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so too. And I like how you pulled that quote from our website because, it takes a whole community, it takes a whole society to enact like meaningful, positive, healthy change. And everyone has to be aware. And that's that prevention piece, right?
There's not one way to do it. Yeah. It's multiple. It's like so many different types of prevention, right? It's so many different levels that we could take part in.
Yeah. I love it.
Well, gosh, how can people find you if they are curious about what it is you do or need you for what it is you do?
Well, we have our 24/7 helpline. That they can reach us at any time. That number is 208-664-9303. Again, that's 208-664-9303. We have social media. We have Instagram. We have Instagram specifically for young people called Safe Passage Teen. Our website, safepassageid.org, is full of so many great opportunities, education resources, opportunities to volunteer. We always need volunteers. We have our upcoming fundraiser in October, Envision.
Where can people find out about Envision?
On our website.
Okay, perfect.
Safepassageid.org.
Great. All the details of Envision are on there.
Yes, you can always come in. We love walk-ins, right? Like I said, sometimes it's just that first step. You can always call anonymously, right? Just because you're calling doesn't mean you have to tell us who you are, your name, your age, anything.
And you can decide to like hang up halfway during that conversation if you're like on the phone with an advocate, you're like, oh my gosh, I made a mistake. I should never have called. You can hang up. We're not going to call back for safety reasons.
You know, I actually noticed that too on the website when I was going and doing some homework on you guys.
Safety alert.
There's a safety alert thing on there, and if you feel unsafe, click this button, and it will just totally shut the whole thing down.
It's fabulous.
Wonderful, wonderful thing.
I also want to do a shout out to probably our most valuable employee, Lucy. She's our service dog.
Okay, Lucy!
Yay,
Shout out to Lucy. She is one of our most valuable employees for our CAC. She does so much for children who have to get interviewed. And I don't think we could do half the work we do without Lucy. She's good for us too.
She's good for us. She's our emotional support dog as well. And like I said, I believe I said this off air. Just shout out to all the employees at Safe Passage. We could not do what we do without feeling obviously empowered and safe and supported in this work, because it is so heavy and it is so, not fun to talk about sometimes.
And
it's
everybody at Safe Passage is honestly so kind, like from the bottom of my heart. So I hope that people can, feel comfortable to come in and talk to us. Whoever it is you're going to talk to, I promise you, they're going to be so kind.
I can second that. I used to go into Safe Passage to deliver coffee once a week, and I always had the best time. It was always one of the last stops of my day, and it was like, I'm here, everything's going to be fine. It was always the most calming experience. You can feel just that sort of that calm energy right when you walk in. And so when we were talking earlier about how it can be very brave, a brave act just to step in the door, it feels better once you're in there. I promise
that. So good. Thank you.
That is so good to hear. We often don't ask people, so that's really good feedback, so thank you.
No problem. Well, thank you both for being on my show. I think this is the best time, and touching on some really touchy issues, and I certainly intend on continuing to talk about this stuff, and we'll have to meet again at some point in the future.
Would love to.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Woo-wee! I have never said the word porn that many times in any conversation I have ever had. Look, I hope you enjoyed this discussion and got some validation from it, maybe even learned something. As a man, you can tell I was particularly struck by the complexity of what is needed from our surrounding community, namely men, and the accountability that we all need to be taking here. You can bet we'll get to some of these topics again very soon. More on that later. But remember, for now, the Kickstarter campaign ends in 3 days, this Saturday, September 21st. Donate what you can, please. Share with your friends. If you are waiting until the last minute to donate, now is that time. Now is the last minute. Hopefully we reach the goal. I certainly hope so. But if not, we will go from there, okay? Reach out at sustainableculture.online if you want to contact me. Thank you all so much for listening once again. Thank you to Sophia and to Kaitlan once again for joining me in this discussion. It was truly an honor to discuss these incredibly touchy and very important topics. If you find the time and you want to support the podcast in any other way, you can leave a review, you can like us where it's applicable. Remember, you can always share us and all that good stuff. Thank you once again for listening. I've been Jet. This is Sustainable Culture. See you folks next time.